My dear students, after the medical examination, now the final step in the selection process is to make the final selection decision. The final step in the selection process requires the line managers or HR manager to make a decision to hire or reject an applicant. The selection decision can be made using either two approaches. One is a compensatory approach and second is a successive hurdles approach. So these two approaches can be used to make the final selection decision. It is up to you that what kind of approach you are using and why you are using that particular approach. First, we will talk about the compensatory approach. There is a candidate. You are going through the whole selection process. There are three main areas. There are predictors, there are evaluation, and then there is a decision. In the predictors, there are a number of predictors to make a final selection decision. Number one is a preliminary interview. When you got an application from the people, when you ask for the people to apply for any job, you go for the preliminary interviewing. After the preliminary interview, if someone is successful, then you ask them to complete the application form, which is equivalent to the resume. After the application form, you evaluated the application form and you suggest to go through the employment testing. And we know about number of the employment testing in the previous discussion. After the employment testing, there is another more rigorous step which we discussed so far is an interview and our interview components. And after the interview components, there are background information, means the reference checks. That is a major chunk of the whole selection process. And then finally, there is the medical examination. These predictors must need to be evaluated and managers would go through the evaluation. Managers consider all of the predictor information at the end of the selection process, and then the manager evaluate the whole selection process. And after that evaluation, there is a decision. Manager makes decisions to hire or reject the applicant, keeping in view the predictors and his or her own evaluation about the candidate. So this is the overall compensatory approach. In the compensatory approach, the manager considers all the selection data for candidates who have passed the initial screening successfully. So not only one bit and piece of data, but all of the data need to be considered in a holistic way. This allows the managers to form an overall impression about the applicant, because you cannot make an impression of an applicant keeping in view one of the predictor. You have to start from the preliminary interview and then you have to end up with the medical examination, and keeping in view all of the predictors, you have to make an impression about the applicant, and keeping in view that impression, you need to make a final selection decision. Because it implies more information and does not rely on just one selection technique, the compensatory approach should lead to the more accurate hiring decision. Because if you were keeping in mind all of the particular predictors to select a person, obviously such kind of a hiring decision would be more accurate, and such kind of hiring decision would be more validated and more reliable. In jobs where a minimum amount of some ability or a skill or a knowledge is critical, however, a successive hurdle approach is recommended. But those jobs which are very rich in on basic knowledge, skills and abilities, in such kind of a jobs, the compensatory approach is more suitable. Finally, because each candidate must complete all the steps in the selection decision, it is made the compensatory approach can be time consuming and expensive. Yes, if you would check all of the predictors, if you would move in the whole sequence, if you would consider all of the knowledge, skills and abilities of the persons, and by evaluating the preliminary interview, by evaluating thoroughly the application form, and by keeping in view the employment testing, and keeping in view the whole interview process and the background checks and the reference checks and the medical examination, obviously such kind of activity would be more time consuming, and obviously such kind of activity would be more expensive. But on the other hand, such kind of a compensatory approach would lead to better hiring decision. So you have to weigh that what kind of a job position you have and what kind of compensatory approach or what kind of approach you need to consider in making the final hiring decision. So the compensatory approach is expensive and time consuming, but it is more authentic to make the final hiring decision.